I'm Vadim. This is HTML Good Parts. It's not an official O'Reilly's book. I spent a lot of time preparing this cover. I found this bitmap image, and I was spent some time tracing it into a vector image. So most of the time I spent preparing this talk on this image. So sorry about the rest. GDE. I'm Vadim Makeev. I'm GDE, a Google developer expert. I'm part of this nice crowd. And I'm between jobs, but I think next week I'm starting a new one. So that's going to be fine. I'm a front-end developer. I moved to Berlin a year and a half ago. Originally, I'm from St. Petersburg, Russia. That's enough about me. Let's talk about this bunch of interesting tags. There are 114 of them in the HTML spec. Do you think you can name all of them? That's a nice one. It's not there anymore. I'm sorry. There are 114 relevant HTML tags that are in the spec. We're going to talk about the spec later. So there's a nice little game or website. Actually, it's a CodePen demo where you can test your HTML tag knowledge. So I think they created it a year ago, and I spent a lot of time going through it, and I stuck at 93. So, like you see, I was staring at my keyboard and trying to remember is there a tag starting from Q, W, E, R. So yeah, have fun with it. If you have something like above 70, you're just super professional HTML developer. But if it doesn't matter, it's just a game. It's like I said, it's a CodePen demo, so you can look through the list of HTML tags and pick. So why am I here? Why am I here talking about HTML in the first place? Let's see. Knowing HTML definitely can improve accessibility for your users. It can improve user experience in general for people using your web applications or websites, or sometimes even web views inside of your mobile applications. And also, it can help to improve performance. This is rarely mentioned. Usually, all HTML talks are focused on accessibility, but sometimes it can improve your performance as well. And raise your hands who are using MDN to read information about HTML. And anything else? Any other resources? W3 Schools, maybe? No. It's a bad one, but you can talk about me in a break, why it's not the best choice. So yeah, it's one of the, I would say it's an official resource for developers. A lot of companies like Google, Mozilla, Apple, Facebook, or whatever, all of these companies are contributing to a single source of truth. So if you're looking for information for developers, like front-end engineers mostly, you should be looking at MDN web docs. But it's not actual source of truth for HTML. The source of truth are the specs. And for HTML, well, back in my time, I'm 38 now. Too old for this already. Back in my time, it used to be the place where we would learn things about HTML. And it is actually the last version of HTML5 spec. These days, when you see on LinkedIn, like, we're looking for a developer with deep knowledge of HTML5 and CSS3, this is bullshit. It's not HTML5 anymore. It's just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So this is outdated version of the spec. They even redirected it to the new version. So it's w3org/tr/html, and it goes to the actual HTML spec. So back in 2019, WG and W3C, they sat down and they agreed to move the spec from one organization to another. And at the end, they signed a document with all this very interesting, important information. meaning that right now HTML spec is developed by WG organization, and HTML5 is not relevant anymore. So when you see someone using HTML 5.2 or previous versions of the spec to prove some point or to consult, let them know that it's not relevant anymore. And the HTML5.3, they started doing this, but it's retired document, do not use. It's an actual screenshot. So HTML specs look like this. Have you seen this website? Raise your hands. Just a few. All right. There's even PDF version. So you can download it and read on while you're on a plane or on a train or in U-Bahn, I don't know. It's a huge document. There's a multi-page version and there's a single-page version. If you'd like to test your web browser, if you'd like to test your tools, you can load a one-page version of it, and it's going to freeze your browser or maybe even burn down your laptop, so be careful. It's a huge document. So use multi-page version or PDF if you need it. And it's also developed on GitHub. So you can go there and add another issue in the list of 1,500 ones that's already there. And you can follow, you can subscribe to this repository, you can subscribe to their Twitter. I think they just recently started an account at Mastodon as well. So they're developing the spec in the open. This is very, very important difference from the previous process. They used to store it somewhere in W3C days. And this is the spec. This is the source of truth. This is where we're getting information this is where we're supposed to get information about HTML. But it's not really meant for developers. It's mostly meant for browser developers. So people who develop actual browsers or other kind of engines working with HTML. And but there is still useful information in the actual HTML spec. You can find, first of all, you can find the source of truth there, but also you can find some specifics that can help you to understand your code better. Like for example, it's a typical card for HTML tag in the spec. This is the card for the P element, and there are many useful information there, but it's mostly for implementers than less for authors. But we can still use this to get something useful out of it. Let's see. Let's talk about the nesting, how we nest tags. Like for example, do you think it is allowed? It is correct to nest UL inside of P? Raise your hand if you think it's all right. Is it all right? It's not? You're not sure? It's all right. Okay, it's okay. Nope. But do you know why it's not? Yeah, we're kind of trying to guess, like based on our internal feeling, like it's wrong for some reason. But the answer is actually in the spec. There is a category for every tag, and there is a content model for every tag. So, for example, in this case, we're not supposed to nest lists inside of paragraph because in paragraphs, content model is phrasing, and category for UL is flow. They're not matching. You're not supposed to nest this tag inside of the other. And what about vice versa, like P inside of UL? Is it all right? No? No, it doesn't look right. Yes, you're right, because we're just discovered content models are not relevant here. But what about this one? Can we put a video tag inside of a link? What do you think? Yeah, sure, why not? Yes, no problem. Why? Because no interactive elements are allowed inside of A. It's not the full list, but specifically no interactive elements. And video is interactive, but still, yes. Why is it so? Because when you add controls element, it's not allowed inside of link, because with control elements you have play button, pause button, etc. But without control elements, it's fine. So it depends on attribute, not the actual tag. Weird.
So how should we think about this when we... there should be no extra buttons kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So no interactive elements inside of other interactive elements, like buttons, links, etc., etc. And everything in the spec. And the same, what about this one? Like, can you wrap a link inside of H1? Yeah, looks legit. Sure. It depends. It depends on what? Well, first of all, there is in A element, there is a transparent content model. So it's not like specific content model, but transparent, which means that in this case, it's fine. Outside of our link, there is a section element inside H1. So it doesn't matter if there's a link or not. If outside is a proper element, it's fine. And if outside is P, we're not supposed to nest our H1 inside of a link. So transparent content model, you know, for links, responsible for that. And you might ask me, so what? Like, I'm not supposed to nest these tags, but I do. And what's going to happen? Who's going to blame me? Is there a HTML police? Yes. There is one, and it's inside of your browser. For example, if you nest H1 inside of link, which is inside of P, here's what's going to happen. So this is how, on the right side, this is how browser is going to render it in your DOM. So this, it's hard to even explain this. You're going to have a mess inside of your nice HTML structure. This is one of the reasons why you're not supposed to nest wrong tags in the wrong places. And if you nest UL inside of P, it will jump out of P and will create another P under it. But if you nest P inside of UL, nothing's going to happen. And this one pisses me off. Like, it's why? Why HTML spec? Why you're not so... So sometimes it's hard to explain, but you have to look at your output and maybe validate. We're going to talk about this later and see what is happening. But let's talk about a bit more practical example. Here's an article, well, not article. Here's some card. I wrapped it inside of an article element. There's H1, P, and some text with a link, and I wrapped everything inside of another link, which looks fine. You imagine some e-commerce website with products in a list, and it's a typical card. You'd like to, sometimes you'd like to have it as a link, go into the details of this product, etc., etc. But if for some reason there is a link inside of this thing, ooh, brace yourself. This is what's going to happen. Instead of 2 links, you're going to have 4 of them in random places. This is how browser is going to render your markup. Only because you nested 1 link inside of the other. You don't trust me, right? Open your browsers and test. This is what's going to happen. This is happening if you nest interactive elements inside of the other interactive elements, or you're using wrong tags in wrong places. So this is why there is HTML police, and it's inside of a browser. This is why you should pay attention to what where you're nesting your HTML tags. I wrote an article recently, like just a few weeks ago, going into more details about tags that are jump out of your the other tags. So read it. You can take a picture if you want. And there I go into details how frameworks deal with it, like single-page frameworks, some of them validate your markup. They're not allowed nesting links, for example, like React, for example. But none of them actually are able to deal with this card example. They all fail one way or another. So you should actually check your code not to trust any frameworks to do that. And there's a nice tool that are good for simple cases. And this is called Can I Include? Not can I use, but can I include? You can put one tag and the other and test child and parent tags if they're compatible. But it's a very simple tool, and it works in a weird way. It actually parses HTML specification, finds this category, and use it as a database for the whole tool. But it works only in simple cases when you want to compare two tags. In the complex cases, when you have this card and the link and another link and paragraph and everything, it's not going to help you. So you can try this one. It's if you need to figure out it in a quick way, not going inside of the actual spec. This is going to help one. And here I'm going to go through the list of HTML elements that are actually important and useful. I'm not telling that the other HTML elements are less relevant or not important, but some of them are forgotten. Some of them were updated recently, and I think it would be useful for you to understand some of them better. So, for example, doctype HTML, like starting from the very top of your document. You might have, not sure if you're aware, but if you're not putting this doctype HTML in your code, if your web page is not starting with it, browser is going to behave in a different way than with this thing. Because there is a quirks mode we used to have in old browsers. So if you see that your web page is behaving weirdly, then it might be with this thing. So always keep an eye on the doctype HTML. It's important for modern web pages for modern browsers to render your HTML, your markup in the right way. The same thing we're going to one line lower. Length attribute it's very important to have it and have it relevant to your content. And if you have some parts of content in different languages, you can also specify it in deeper. So it's not just HTML attribute on HTML tag. It's also could be applied to any paragraph or any section of your website. So using this helps screen readers or just readers of your page. Like I've seen some tools reading out loud your articles, even if you're perfectly able to see them, just for your convenience. So these kind of things help to translate websites, so don't forget about length attributes. I love this title tag because there are only two places in HTML where you can nest other tags and they will be rendered like a plain text. One of them is title, and the other, do you know the other one?
In code?
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
Text area.
Text area, right. So if you put a tag inside of text area, between open and closing tag, it will be rendered just as a plain text, not as a tag. And title, it's the other place. So you can put your actual tags in there without using this LT, GT mnemonics. Speaking of performance, make sure you read about preload and resource hints. These are fairly new specs, like preload, DNS prefetch, preconnect, prefetch, pre-render. These are tags that declaratively that they can use declaratively to specify what kind of resources you're trying to request on this web page, or you're planning to use, or what websites you're planning to connect to below somewhere inside of your body or in JavaScript. So specifying this in advance will help browser to render your web pages quickly. And there's a very great talk, Get Your Head Straight by Harry Roberts, talking about HTML side of performance. So I think it's like 15-minute long talk. He talks only about head element of your HTML, like link, script, what kind of text, like titles, meta, and this all kind of text, and their attributes and their variations. So he's actually consulting huge companies on how to fix their heads to make their websites faster. So highly recommend it. Going down, main aside, there's a way to specify what's the main content of your website and what's the additional content, some extra. For example, when you have reader mode in Safari or Firefox on some other browsers and applications, they look for main tag to try to understand where's the main content of the web page. It's not the only tag or the only thing that they're looking for to understand where's the main content, but it's one of them. It might help some reader modes. The same goes to other landmarks of your web page, like header, main, footer. You can specify what's repeated, what's unique for this web page. So don't forget these kind of landmarks, and it's going to help your user to navigate. This is the screenshot of the VoiceOver application. It's a screen reader on macOS, and users can actually navigate between parts of your websites if you have these kind of landmarks on your web page, like header, main, footer, for example. These are 3 basic ones, but there are more, like nav and some others. As for section and article, I'm going to present my own point of view on them, because it's eternal discussion, like what's the section, what's the article, what's the difference between them. Section is a content section. Like if you have a typical landing page for your company, and if you have multiple sections, like usually colored with different colors, and you're scrolling through the single page, these are typical sections, and you can split your web pages into them. And adding title helps screen readers as well to navigate better. The same goes for article element. Article is a thing. It's an independent part of information entity, like I put it in the title. So you can mark your content properly with section and article elements to help users to navigate them better. It's not like it's the most important thing in the world, but it helps, and also it might help to yourself understand your code better in a few weeks, months, or years. As for titles, please use the whole range of H1 to H6 appropriately, and once they nest, once they change priority, don't forget to put them in without any breaks in between them, like H1, H2, H3. Don't skip heading levels. It will help users to navigate your website using screen readers as well. And there used to be a thing in HTML spec where they would recommend using H1s only, and articles and sections would show browser what's the level of the heading you're supposed to use. And it's very convenient, I would say, for developers. Use just a single HTML tag for all kind of titles. But it never really worked for screen readers, browsers, search engines, so please don't do that. It's not relevant anymore. It has never been relevant, really. So if you see multiple H1s on a web page, there's a problem. There's a great series of books by Jens Meyer. It's not relevant to a heading. I'm just putting some random but very, very useful pieces of information. It's a series of books, Upgrade Your HTML. They are tiny, There are ebooks, like self-published ones. Jens Meyert, I think he's also based in Germany. I think he's from Hamburg. So I would recommend reading these books if you're interested into diving into HTML deeper. It's much easier than reading HTML spec. I would say. I would definitely say so. Going further, there's an age group tag in HTML which is not relevant and not super relevant to modern browsers. It's a leftover from the old outline algorithm. And if you would like to have some heading and subheading, it used to be the way mentioned in the WG spec, and it's old and wrong. If you need a heading and subheading, use heading and paragraph. The spec used to recommend old way of doing so, but these days they changed the spec. I think a year ago they removed the outline algorithm from the whole spec, so it's not relevant anymore. If you see anything like this on the left side, where two headings go next to each other, there's a problem. So use paragraph for subheadings. A figure and fig caption. If you need some text for your pictures, don't forget about this tag. It's not a description of the picture. It's additional information. It's a caption for it. If you don't duplicate alt and fig captions, these are two different things. But you can use figure and fig caption for captioning code samples or tables or graphics or anything like that. So it's a universal way of adding some additional info to your, even quotes, for example. There's going to be a quote later in this presentation. It's running in browser, actually. So I use this figure-fig caption combo to show the author of the quote. The same goes for input, all kind of input types. A few years ago, Microsoft did some effort, did some job on input elements in Chromium, and other browsers are catching up too. So modern input type date or month or like color pickers, they already built into the browsers. And if you have simple use cases where you don't have to combine all of them into a single select, drop down and super customizable, if you have simple use cases, please use built-in input types like tel, URL, email, number. There are many convenient attributes. Like, for example, you can use type email and specify multiple attributes, and it's going to validate the input for multiple emails, not just single one. So who knew, right? There's also required pattern multiple attributes. Yeah, don't forget about those. It's going to help you to validate your user's input. And the same goes for input mode attribute. There used to be an old way of specifying special kinds of input elements for different kind of information, like phones, emails, what kind of this kind of content. But these days it's better to use input mode instead of type, because it won't get in your way trying to validate your inputs, and it's going to show the proper keyboard on mobile devices, for example. So this input mode will show telephone keyboard specifically optimized for phones, URLs, emails, decimal search, and this kind of stuff. So don't forget about these attributes, and while using these input modes, you can use a pattern attribute to validate your input. You don't have to download a 100 kilobyte JavaScript library for that. Lists, you can specify different kind of bullets, lower alpha. You can reverse them. You can start them from different numbers. You know, knowing how HTML spec works can actually save your time, save you some code. So there are some interesting attributes for lists. So go to your MDN or read those books, or go to the HTML spec and learn these attributes that will help you to deliver this kind of a lists to your users in a much more simpler way. And a few words about menu element. A menu, it's not that kind of menu as you might think. I've seen people using menu element for navigation on your website because it's a navigation menu. Why wouldn't I use... So people sometimes treat HTML elements like words in a language. Like, I like this word. It sounds, yeah, it sounds right for this kind of a sentence. I'm going to use it. But there's a problem. There is a spec defining the actual role, the actual use case for this kind of attack. So for menu, this is a use case for menu, like a context menu. And if you would like to use it, yeah, menu, list items, yeah, it's kind of a list. And you can put some buttons inside. And if you have something like Google Docs or whatever kind of software you have online, yeah, you can use it to create these kind of menus, but don't use it for navigation menus. Lists are good because they're screen reader friendly, and screen readers usually announce the number of items in the list, and for people who cannot actually see your website, it might be helpful. There's a big difference between 3 links and 500 links, and yeah, using lists, you can convey this information. And I know you rarely use table elements these days, but imagine this kind of a table: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and just 3 rows, 3 columns. What's going to happen with this table if we're going to use call group element with nested call elements and some span, style, and things like that? Do you know what's going to happen to this table? Wild guess. Huh?
I think the first column will be green.
Uh-huh.
Is that, I think the first column will have the first color.
Good. Any other ideas? So yeah, it was the right idea. So basically, this thing is gonna force all the columns, all the table cells to get this background color, and because there is a call span to, like span into 2, 3, or 5, or whatever number of columns you have, they're gonna be filled with this background color. So you don't have to specify all the class names. You can just say, like, this column, yeah, just inherit this background color. It's not super, like it's not almighty, because you cannot pass text color, I believe, only background color, and maybe something else, but that's plenty. If
Can I assign a class?
Huh?
Can I assign a class instead of style?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. It's just for like for the slide purposes. So you can they're going to inherit styles even from class names. So it's not a problem. So yeah, basically it's a special group of tags that can help you to style or specify some information about your columns in your tables. So don't forget about those or learn about those. You might have seen these definition lists, but a few years ago they allowed officially in the HTML spec to have groups. So you can actually put a div inside of definition list to group some of those. It's valid, it's correct. So the spec is changing constantly, not with the pace of ECMAScript, but pretty rapidly, I would say. Detailed summary, if you need something simple that's going to open and show something without any JavaScript, or if it's going to be open by default. Even I think they implemented it already in Chrome, and if you use certain attributes, you can actually search through your web page with those details closed. And if browser is going to find something inside of these details, it's going to open details for you. I think other browsers are planning to implement this as well. So this is a built-in toggler inside of HTML. This is for you, Eugenia. She gave a talk about Web Almanac on one of the last GDG meetups. So there is a nice chapter in Web Almanac about markup for the last year. They talk about how you as a developers actually use HTML, how you use a markup. And you're going to find a lot of interesting information there, and maybe some mistakes, like common mistakes, common problems, or some trends in markup on the web. So Web Almanac Markup 2022, it's going to be a good place to learn this kind of stuff. Something very pretty old, but not very commonly used. You can actually use tag dialog to open actual dialogues, and they're going to be accessible. They're going to be very convenient to use. There are some APIs attached to this tag, specified in HTML spec as well, that are going to make your inputting some data and closing these kind of dialogues very convenient. So if you're using another 200 kilobytes JavaScript library for that, you might as well try this dialog element. And even going back to performance, like even understanding defer, async, type module, no module, or understanding what integrity attribute means can improve your website or your application performance or even security. So learn about those things. These are parts of HTML. And please remove typed text JavaScript already from your code. This has been useless for many years, forever, and people still put it in their code. So we don't need this kind of attributes in our script tags. Like we never needed them. I mentioned the table. Imagine if you have a template element like this. So you can ship on the left side, you can ship this from your server. On the right side, you can also ship this template from the server and use JavaScript to populate your table with some rows using these templates. So you can actually, you don't have to ship your templates as JavaScript. You can actually put them right in your markup, and it's going to reduce payload, JavaScript payload, and it's going to improve the rendering performance of your page. So you can get this by ID and get the content and then insert it, this document fragment, back into your table when you need it. So these kind of tags like template help even for single page applications to run much more performant. This is one of the new additions to HTML spec. I think it's the last, it's the previous one. It's the slot. If you're working with web components, you probably know how this thing works. I'm not going to go into details. But it used to be the last tag they added to HTML spec, but recently, just a few weeks ago, they added a new tag called search. Basically, it's a landmark that's not implemented in any browsers yet. It's in the spec. It's going to have role search. It's going to be easier for screen reader users to find where the search on your website. It's going to be applicable to typical website search or like for a filter for your product page, for example. So soon the support for this element is going to ship to browsers. But you can probably start using it with the role search, but be careful and test in screen readers if you're curious. And just a few notes about the code style, about HTML code style, closing tags and quotes. There is a official, in huge quotes, official Google style guide for HTML and CSS, and they recommend writing HTML like this. Not closing tags, not using quotes. Don't do this. I think I talked with some Googlers. They weren't aware that there is a style guide, official style guide, and they're clearly against it. So if you find some code style like this, like some official code style like this, be careful, because you have to close title element, for example, because if you're not going to close it, you're going to have problems. But you can't skip closing tag for content element, for example. And you always have to keep in mind what kind of tags you can close, you cannot close. In some cases, quotes are much safer than without quotes. So if you'd like to strip your HTML from unneeded parts, use tools for that. Don't do this manually. So in your markup, always use quotes and closing tags. So please don't use this kind of code style. And closing slash, I'm going to make some enemies right now, is useless. It's okay to have your closing slash in your JSX or whatever templating language you have. But when you're shipping it to browsers don't actually care about this thing. They don't parse it at all. They look for closing bracket. They don't look at the slash. So this is a useless pile of useless slashes in your code. So if you have some minification tools working on the output of your application code, remove those. You don't need them. It's fine to have it in your source code. So truly useless, because browsers don't care. All browsers have the same HTML parser, and they don't care about these kind of slashes. I've been talking about this thing for a long time, and you might be asking yourself, but why? Why do we have to know all these HTML tags? I try to give you a reason for that, but when they're asking you the difference between splice and slice on every interview for a front-end developer, they probably think that's important. And it's important to understand all the array methods. But knowing the difference between them might improve your code, or you can just go to your, I don't know, MDN or some other source of information. But if you're misusing HTML tag, if you know only 3 HTML tags like div, span, and link, or maybe image 4, your button, yeah, it's advanced level. It's advanced level. You're actually making worse interfaces. So knowing array methods, knowing HTML tags, it's equally important. And just the last part about validation. There's a quote by Alex Russell. I'm going to read it out loud because I love it. You can take some HTML, write it down on the back of a napkin, put it in your pocket, put it in a wash, grab it out of a dryer, uncrumple a little bit, type it back with a bunch of typos, and it will be probably render something not super different from what you meant. HTML is super resilient. It's ready for you to write it in the most possible wrong way. And it's still going to render something. Browsers are brilliant at rendering HTML, unlike JavaScript. Just a single wrong character and everything is broken, and yeah, you see just a white screen. So why would we need to validate HTML? Because since browsers are going to take care of it anyway. I showed you some examples, and there's a very good website called HTML with a list of examples of poorly written markup. I would recommend reading it for fun. There is a chance you'll find your own source code there. Be careful. But yeah, it's a very nice resource of fun and maybe some sorrow as well. Very, very, very nice resource by Manuel Matuzovic. So going back to HTML validator. This is the actual official W3C markup validator service, and this is the main and the only not the only, but the main tools you're supposed to use to validate your markup. But it's 2023. It's hard to validate your markup by entering, it's in a text field, right? So I'm not using it like that. I'm using it like this. So there is a way using the NU package from 8pm npm to run Java with some attributes, some keys, and validate your markup in your dist folder. It's gonna use Java, and for example, I don't have Java installed on this machine. They like for MacBooks, or I think even on Windows, they don't come pre-installed with Java, and it's not the best thing to have on your laptop, from my opinion. So I use GitHub for GitHub Actions for that. I run a simple GitHub action that's not even mentioned in Java, but it works anyway. I'm not sure why. I'm specifying that I'm using Node.js, but I'm not specifying that I'm using Java, but it still runs. So for every commit, for every pull request, there is a GitHub action running that's checking all the HTML with this validator. And I also mentioned this file there. It's a filter file. It might become useful to you, so I'm going to mention it. So this is a list of exceptions. I trust W3C HTML validator a lot, but sometimes they're not correct. They're not up to speed with the latest development of HTML spec, or I know what I'm doing with my code. So you can put some exceptions in this list. Basically, direct quote of an error. So attribute media not allowed and element met at this point. It is allowed in browsers already, etc., etc., etc. So if you find some errors that you're not going to fix to make your output, to filter your output, you can use this config file. And there are many other tools. I'm going to mention HTML validate one. It's written in Node.js, well, in JavaScript basically. So it's easier to integrate in your modern workflow. For styling, for code style, there's a HTML hint, excuse me. It's a simple one. I think there are like 15 rules in there, but it might also help to catch you some problems. And there's also a validate HTML nesting package that's trying to do something similar to what React does. So if you're nesting links in React, like I mentioned before, it's going to warn you, like you're doing something wrong. This is an external package doing something similar. So if you need to validate your components, not just the whole output of your website, you can try to use this HTML validate or try to use some others from this list. So, but I would recommend using HTML validator, especially if you have some sort of server-side rendering and you have a list of HTML files to validate. The full HTML files, not just fragments. And again, in my days, we used to have badges like this on our websites. We were proud that our markup is valid. And HTML 401, 10, 15 years ago. And these days, I have this kind of badge in my README on GitHub. So every time I commit something to my repository, there is a GitHub action running, and if it's all right, I have this kind of badge. I'm proud of it. So you can insert something like this in your Markdown as well. So there's a path to your HTML YML workflow and some other extra information that's going to give you this SVG file, basically. And I'd like to finish with this quote by Zach Lederman, which has a better first meaningful pain time. Raw 8.5 HTML file with full text of every single one of my 27,000 tweets, or a client-rendered React site with exactly one tweet on it. 8.5 HTML files is faster. JavaScript is expensive. HTML is almost free. So if you have a chance, server-side render. If you have a chance, write good HTML, and your browser gonna be thankful. Your users gonna be thankful. Your performance will be better, accessibility, etc., etc. I hope I convinced you. Thank you.